It was late October when Claire received the letter. It wasn't your usual mail. The envelope was ancient, the paper inside yellowed and fragile. The name written on it made her heart skip. Willow Lane. She had left that house, her childhood home, nearly 2 decades ago, never daring to return. Her parents had died in a fire that consumed the upper floors, but the cause had remained a mystery. The letter was from an attorney claiming the house was now hers. No strings attached, just the decaying property waiting at the end of an overgrown driveway. Feeling a strange pull, Claire decided to return, against her better judgment. Her friends warned her against it. They whispered, "The house is cursed. Everyone who enters never comes out the same." But she didn't listen. Curiosity, or perhaps a long-buried sense of duty, drove her back to Willow Lane. When Claire arrived, the house loomed large and silent, under a sky painted dark with approaching night. The windows were covered in grime, and the front door hung slightly ajar, as if inviting her in. The air around it seemed different, heavier somehow, as though time itself moved slower. Inside, the house was eerily preserved, as though someone had been living there all these years. Dusty furniture was still in place, old photographs lined the walls, and the grandfather clock in the hallway still ticked. But something felt wrong. The longer Claire stayed, the more she noticed. Small things, doors that she swore she closed would be open, shadows that shouldn't be there, and a whisper in the wind that sounded almost human. In one of the upstairs rooms, Claire discovered a diary. It belonged to her mother, and the last few entries were troubling. Her mother had written about strange occurrences leading up to the fire, unexplainable noises, furniture moving by itself, and a feeling of being watched. As night fell, the house became more hostile. The temperature dropped drastically, and the whispers grew louder, echoing through the halls. Claire tried to rationalize it, blaming her nerves and the eerie atmosphere, but soon she couldn't ignore it any longer. The voices weren't just in her head, they were calling her name. She tried to leave, but the front door wouldn't open. The windows were sealed shut. Panic set in, and she ran upstairs, hoping to find another way out. But the house had changed. The layout was different. Corridors she hadn't seen before twisted and turned, leading her deeper into the heart of the building. In one of the hidden rooms, she found a photograph of a family, not her own. Their faces were blurred, but the eyes seemed to be staring directly at her. She turned it over and saw a date scrawled in the corner, October 31st, 1904. Claire's sleep was restless. In her dreams, she saw visions of a family trapped in the house, their faces pale and gaunt, forever trying to escape. The fire had started in the basement, and she saw them pounding on the walls, but the house wouldn't let them leave. When she woke, her body ached as if she had been running, and her breath came in short gasps. The whispers were now louder than ever. They weren't just calling her name. They were telling her to leave. But how could she? Every door she tried was locked. Every path led her back to that photograph, which now seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. Determined to find answers, Claire ventured into the basement, the one place she had never been as a child. The stairs creaked under her weight, and the air grew thick with the smell of dampness and decay. At the bottom, she found an old furnace, its door rusted shut. But it was what lay beside it that made her heart freeze. Bones. Old, dry bones, scattered across the floor, and in the corner, a large trunk. Inside was a journal, older than her mother's, written in a shaky hand. It detailed the horrors of the house, how it was built on cursed land, how every family that lived there had been driven mad by the spirits that haunted it. As Claire flipped through the pages, she found something horrifying. A detailed entry from a former owner, dated just a few days before her parents had died, warning that the house was alive, that it fed on fear, trapping its residents until they were consumed by madness or fire. The house began to shake violently, as though it knew she had uncovered its secret. The walls trembled, and the floor beneath her feet seemed to move, like something was crawling just beneath the surface. The voices were now screaming, pleading for her to leave while she still could. Claire raced upstairs, but every door slammed in her face. The house was changing again, the rooms twisting and warping, leaving her no way out. Desperation clawed at her mind as she realized there was only one way to escape. She had to burn the house down, just like her parents had tried to do. Grabbing a can of kerosene from the garage, Claire doused the walls and floors, the smell of gasoline filling her lungs. The house seemed to fight back, doors slamming open and shut, the walls groaning as though they were alive. But Claire lit the match, throwing it onto the soaked wood. The fire spread quickly, the flames licking up the walls and engulfing the house. As the heat intensified, the whispers turned into screams, not just from the house, but from the spirits trapped within it. Claire barely made it out alive, stumbling onto the driveway as the fire raged behind her. She watched as the house, along with its terrible secrets, was consumed by the flames, but as she stood there, gasping for breath, she heard one last whisper in the wind, "You'll be back." The fire department arrived too late. The house was reduced to a pile of smoldering ash and charred timbers. Claire sat on the curb, her clothes singed and her face streaked with soot. She could still hear the screams in her head, the tortured wails of whatever had been trapped inside the house. The firefighters asked her questions, but she couldn't focus. She muttered only a few words. The house, it was alive. For the next few weeks, Claire tried to move on. She returned to her apartment, surrounded herself with friends. But something had changed. She felt a heaviness, a presence, lingering just at the edge of her awareness. Strange things began happening around her. Objects would go missing, only to reappear in places she never put them. Lights would flicker, and she'd feel cold gusts of wind indoors, even when the windows were closed, and then there were the nightmares. Each night, Claire dreamed of the house. In her dreams, it wasn't burned down. It stood tall, pristine, beckoning her to return. The whisper was there too, faint but persistent. "You'll be back." She tried to ignore it, convinced it was just the trauma of the fire. But the more she pushed it away, the more intense the dreams became. Faces of people she had never met swirled in her sleep, their eyes hollow, their mouths open in silent screams. They reached out to her, pulling her back toward the house, their cold fingers gripping her wrists. One night, Claire woke with a start, her heart pounding. She was standing in her living room, her hand on the front door, ready to leave. She didn't remember getting out of bed. Her hands were shaking. Was she sleepwalking, or was something guiding her? That same night, Claire's phone buzzed with an unknown number. Reluctantly, she answered. "Claire." The voice on the other end was distorted, but she recognized it immediately. Her mother. "Mom," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You have to go back." The voice rasped, heavy with warning. "You didn't finish what you started." The call ended abruptly, leaving Claire standing in the dark with only her racing thoughts for company. Her mother had died years ago, yet the voice had been unmistakable. As much as she wanted to believe it was a hallucination, some part of her knew it was real. The house wasn't done with her. Against her better judgment, Claire packed a bag and drove back to Willow Lane. The plot of land where the house once stood was now a burnt wasteland, covered in ash and debris. But the second she arrived, that feeling returned, the suffocating weight in the air, the sense of being watched. The ruins of the house still held power over her. As Claire walked through the ashes, her footsteps kicking up dust and charred remnants of the life she once knew, the ground beneath her feet felt wrong, almost hollow. She knelt down, brushing away the blackened wood, revealing a trapdoor she had never seen before. It was old, ancient even, with strange symbols etched into the metal. Without thinking, Claire tugged at the rusted handle, and it gave way with an eerie creak. Beneath the trapdoor was a staircase leading down into darkness, a void that seemed to swallow the light. She hesitated only for a moment before descending into the depths. The air was thick with dampness, and the further she went, the more the whispers returned. Only this time they weren't just voices, they were memories. She heard her mother's voice again, but it was younger, more frantic. She heard her father shouting, and then other voices, children, men, women, all overlapping in a chaotic chorus. At the bottom of the stairs, Claire found herself in an underground chamber, lined with stone walls covered in strange markings. In the center of the room stood a large, circular altar. On the floor around the altar were symbols, glowing faintly, pulsating with energy. And there, lying atop the altar, was a book. The book was bound in leather, its pages yellowed with age, and as Claire opened it, her hands trembled. The text inside was written in a language she didn't recognize, but the illustrations made her blood run cold. They depicted scenes of rituals, sacrifices, and families trapped within the house's walls. As Claire turned the pages, she realized the truth. The house wasn't just haunted, it was cursed. Each family that lived there was bound to the land, their souls trapped in a never-ending cycle of suffering. The fire that killed her parents had only been part of the ritual. They had tried to destroy the house to break the curse, but they hadn't finished the ritual, and now it was up to Claire. The whispers intensified, filling the room, urging her to act. The symbols on the floor glowed brighter, the air crackling with energy. Claire knew what she had to do. The book detailed the final step of the ritual, a sacrifice. But it wasn't asking for blood. It wanted something else. It wanted her soul. Claire stood at the altar, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. If she completed the ritual, she could break the curse and free the souls trapped within the house, including her parents. But in doing so, she would be bound to the land, her soul forever tied to the cursed ground. If she walked away, the curse would remain, and the spirits would continue to haunt whoever dared to live there next. The house would rebuild itself, as it always had, and the cycle of torment would begin again. The room trembled around her, the walls seeming to close in. The voices were pleading now, begging her to finish it, to release them from their eternal prison. Tears streamed down Claire's face as she placed her hand on the altar. The moment her skin touched the cold stone, the room erupted with energy, the symbols on the floor flashing with a blinding light. The whispers turned into screams, and the ground beneath her feet began to crack, splitting open to reveal a chasm of darkness. As the darkness enveloped her, Claire whispered one final word: goodbye. Months later, a new family moved into the rebuilt house on Willow Lane. It was a young couple with a small child, eager to start their lives in their dream home. The house looked perfect on the outside, but inside, something felt off. At night, they would hear strange noises, whispers in the walls, footsteps in the attic, and sometimes, in the dead of night, they would see her, a figure standing at the edge of their bed, her eyes hollow, her face gaunt. Claire had kept her promise. The curse was broken, but she had become part of the house, forever watching, forever waiting, and now she wasn't alone.